now is a now is the opportunity for some continued dialogue between the audience, folks online. Continue to tweet in your questions, and between our panelists as well. I'm going to actually throw it to you guys right now as you guys are getting warmed up. As you were watching each other, what questions did you want to ask of each other? Because sometimes the panelists feel as though, you know, I'm part of the audience now, or I can't ask questions. What did you want to ask each other as you watched each other's presentation?
You go first, MJ.
Yeah, thanks. I appreciate that. I appreciated your clarification of the XMOOC and CMOOC, which I failed to remember to do, and I would agree with you on that. That I think, and as I tried to say at least, that I do think there are some really innovative uses for MOOC technology, and folks that are looking at those. Particularly, one of the affordances I think about the MOOCs that we haven't capitalized on enough is their massiveness. I mean, that is in fact the first word in the term. We don't stop to think about what possibilities that provides us in terms of, particularly when we're looking at multicultural audiences. How might we use these opportunities to create collaborations and interactions that haven't been possible in the past? So I appreciated your clarification on that. And I would also agree about the distinction you made. See, I don't have any questions, I'm just agreeing with her. This is what happens when you have people that carefully craft these events. You end up with folks that,
it's always good for the choir to practice.
But I also agreed with your clarification on the big data and the need for the narrative in addition to that. And one of the things that scares me about big data, frankly, is that it's easy very quickly to look at these correlations and assume causations, when in fact, it's not going to be okay for us to say, okay, well, so all of the blue-eyed, blonde-haired people do best in this class, therefore those are the people that should be in this class. I mean, those are the kinds of scary things that eventually could come out of this. We need the narrative to go along with the big data, and we need for folks in academic affairs and in the faculty to also be engaged in a big way in these data analyses, because if it's just the data wonks that are looking at these numbers, they may not understand some of the subtleties behind these data. So.
Yeah. So I'll ask her a question.
Please.
Excellent. So again, on that topic, the data collection and learning analytics coming trend is, how do we make sure in higher ed that we include all the voices, student voices as well, and not just the opt-out or the passive. Jer Thorpe says we should own and operate our data. I should be really critically engaged about what data I'm giving, and I don't mean in a paranoid sense, just a kind of curiosity and agency about where I choose to give that, I choose not to do that. But the sense of I'm not even sure we know without the student voice in that process, what we should be measuring and how it's relevant, and what about the qualitative piece, the story that goes with it. What are we measuring? And so how do we, in the trend of vendor-driven, we're all busy, it needs to be cost-effective and quick, how do we push back and let our inner troublemaker come out and mess with that so we don't end up like secondary ed down the road?
Right. Yeah.
That's a real question. You have to answer.
I have to answer it. because there's cameras all around me. Yeah, I think that, and one of the things I've appreciated about our conversations already today is the extent to which you're bringing the student voice into this. I think it's critically important, and I would agree with you. I don't know how we engage them, though, in those discussions. I don't have a quick answer to that. I think certainly involving them as we begin looking at some of the models that are being created around analytics, involving them in, one of the things about big data is that it shouldn't just be about us asking questions and having predetermined hypotheses, that in fact we ought to also take opportunities to just look at the data themselves and try to find the patterns that are emerging. And those may be real good opportunities to engage students in the discussions as well. But I don't have an easy question for you. Do you have ideas on that?
One of the things are the multiple platforms. You were frightening me over lunch with the notion that because of various legislative concerns, you don't, social media and what kind of accounts, and the whole notion of, you know, the digital imagination, if a kind of sense of agency over a creative space, to have a blogging platform like Rampages at VCU, or a domain of one's own at Mary Washington. And we are struggling not nearly as successfully as either of those institutions at Virginia Tech, but we have WordPress, and we want every student to play with it, engage it. Now, that's not free range and do what you do on your Facebook. They get to make those decisions, but we're engaged in the process with them. So we're educating about, you know, your professional digital footprint and what difference it makes. Be your best self, no matter if you're in a one-on-one conversation or you're doing it, you know, talking about, you know, the social justice community activity you just had an epiphany over that you didn't realize because your course is that kind of revelation is a good thing. They shouldn't be perfect. Do you know what I mean? But we're not
creating those environments.
We don't have enough of those environments in higher ed. We're in lockdown rather than.
Yeah.
Interesting. Lockdown, Dr. Paul. So in the same vein of in the same, you know, speaking of massive and online, question from the virtual audience. We've talked a little bit about instructional change, pedagogies changing. How do you envision the faculty themselves changing? What's the role of changing faculty in all of this? How do we change the people that are supposed to be doing these new things?
You want to start?
I'll throw this out to either one of you.
Yeah, this is why I do the work I do. I work with future faculty who, because they don't have all the initials yet after them, still see themselves as learners with more easily, and faculty who something happens when we're not allowed to not know. We're not curious anymore, and we defend against what we don't know. That's problem number one. The other thing I'm amazed about is I think it has to do with fear. We don't often call it that, but fear in environment of learners where I must be the expert and sage on the stage, or I'm not comfortable. What if they ask me something I don't know? Instead of, that's cool, I'm so excited when they ask me something I don't know. Now we're getting somewhere interesting. Where is that kind of sense of self-efficacy, and how do we help faculty regain that and get comfortable with that? Where did we lose that along the way? That we are pretenders. We stand as experts and deliver content. And I don't know.
Did you ever have that experience actively when you were teaching? I did. When I had a classroom full, I was at Lehigh in the Graduate College of Education and was teaching a rather large class of just 40, but it was large for us, so it felt a little overwhelming to me. And one of the students in the class, it was Tools for Teachers course, and one of them asked me a question about copyright, and I had absolutely no idea. I don't remember what the nature of the question was, but you know, copyright on the internet, it's complicated. I realized, this was several years ago now, I realized that there were many students in the classroom with their laptops open, just clicking away, doing their own thing. And I said, you know what? I said, you guys look it up. It just dawned on me. You guys look it up. And it was freeing. It was such a great moment. And one of the students found the answer. They started asking each other more questions. And the next thing I knew, they'd taken over the class. It was the most wonderful thing in the world. It really was a very pivotal moment for me. And I think those are the kinds of experiences that we need to free ourselves up to be willing to engage our students in that way and recognize it's not incumbent upon us to have all the answers. It is instead incumbent upon us to help our students find the answers.
Yeah, for me, one of the things we talk a lot in JEDI with the future faculty is it's not just the what, it's the how. So you can take, you know, McKeechie's 147 teaching tips and go through them and you know, try to do those, but if you're not critically self-reflexive and engaged about the how, that's the key piece. So it's not, for me, there's a training module we just need to get straight on, whether it's a, you know, technology tool in my hand I'm playing with and seeking the affordances of and exploring and trying to break and reinvent and, you know, remix. It's how you engage. When you say, are there any more questions? Are any questions out there? Good. Yeah. But if you are curious, learners know that. And so when you say, that's a great question, I don't know about copyright. Who knows about copyright? And they explore, that sets off a kind of energy that I think most learners, given the chance, will step up toward.
What structures and systems prevent faculty from doing that now, if any?
Well, and this is where I think part of that question may be coming from. You know, we certainly at the institutions we serve have the promotion and tenure issues, pressures to research, pressures to publish. We were talking again over lunch about the need, of course, for us to be valuing teaching more in the ways in which we're rewarding faculty. Whether that leads down the path at some point to differentiated kinds of roles that faculty play. The question there becomes that we don't want it to become a two-tiered system where the teaching faculty are sort of down here someplace and the research faculty are up here on a pedestal. We've got to figure out how to balance those two because I do think it's a very difficult task to manage to keep all those balls in the air and to be good at all of those things. Folks who are researchers tend to be sort of into themselves and solitary, I mean, generally speaking, to stereotype, but you know, whereas teaching is a different kind of mindset and way of being.
Yeah, and I don't know how we fix it, except not everyone is good at everything in the same way. And so I've always, drawn to institutions that have more flexibility. There is a hierarchy, and disrupting that hierarchy is something we are the institution that we get to do. Do you know what I mean? That seizing my own agency as a member of a community is what I'm entitled to do and should be doing. It's my responsibility. And I use a sports metaphor, so I hope I don't lose anyone. Baseball. You don't have 9 first basemen, you don't have 9 second basemen. Why can we not, but that team can win a World Series. So why don't we think about it the same way? If at Virginia Tech, if you are, research expenditure, you are the top NSF dollar getter, but you can't teach your way out of a paper bag, then do less of that. And your colleague, whom his research expenditures are here, but teaches here, does that gateway to the major, does so much work, but is not devalued in that. It should be, it's problematic that the researcher is not as great in the classroom and mentoring graduate students, but we just don't talk about that. We don't do it well, but build a diverse team, just like they do in business. Out problem solves 2 to 1. Why don't we do that? Not that hard.
We've got a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have time for a couple more questions from the audience or from online. So I'm looking across right here up front.
So when we do these innovative things, how do we measure success? Right? How do we know whether things are worth scaling up if they are successful and which ones aren't?
Well, of course, it depends on what we're trying to accomplish, getting back to the original need that we've identified. Certainly getting back to the need for us to be serving our students and understanding, is this in fact advancing their knowledge of whatever the topic is? Is this in fact advancing their progression towards the degree? Is it in fact getting them to where they want to be in the ways in which they're measuring success? And when we do see that, then understanding not just that piece of it, but also the context within which that's happening, so that when we do start talking about scale, we know where it's going to scale well and where it's not going to scale well. Go ahead.
Yeah, and sometimes I don't want to ask the question of scale, because sometimes an N of 1, when you set a student's mind on fire and you see that, I want to know how that worked, and it's an N of 1. And that can be important. Now, I may be able to leverage that and riff on it and figure out ways to do it, but I don't always want to have to be accountable to large numbers to prove before then we decide we can go that way. Yes, sometimes, depending on the context, but I also, sometimes we need to trust our gut, particularly in the learning environments. You see it when it happens, too.
And scale isn't necessarily just about numbers either. I mean, we're also talking about culture change. We're talking about the extent to which people are talking among themselves. I think you had asked the question earlier about how do you share these things with your colleagues. How do we get those conversations started? So it's not just about how many students served, how many hamburgers served, but how many, how thoroughly are we changing the culture and the ways in which we're thinking.
We've got time for one more question, and he's right there.
How do we engage the K through 12 community so that when our students get here, they're ready for that type of thinking?
Thank you.
Okay, I'll start with that one. It's a great question, but I always, when teach undergrads, I have pre-service teachers in my classroom. So twofold perhaps. One is You are teaching future teachers. And so seize that opportunity to do that. And also, what is the divide? We build that bridge, both networked, both electronically in ways we can, and with our communities that surround us, the regional communities, right? Why don't we cross-pollinate more than we do? Because we just need to try something, you know, rather than, I don't need an initiative. Might be nice to have funding, but you can start with, you know, a brown bag. Those kind of efforts can make a huge difference to foster change.
And I think these can be should be two-way conversations. You know, our teachers out in the schools are hungry for help with the content areas and working with, for example, scientists to help them with the science education and so forth. But I think also that our faculty can benefit greatly from their knowledge of pedagogy and their knowledge of their students and the ways in which they observe their students and react and adjust to their students' needs. So I think we need to be sure that as we're engaging K-12 that we're not going in to fix them, just like we don't want to be fixed ourselves, but that rather we're engaging in a two-way conversation and acknowledging that we have as much to learn from them and what they're going through as they do from us.
Yeah, and how do we leverage, if there's a lot of high school teachers, there's an online community of critical pedagogy, but there's fighting against the kind of teaching to the test mentality. How do I ask, see with new eyes and hear with new ears, and listen in that community to figure out, I have got, you know, the privilege, I'm not at risk in that community, so how do I aid, you know, be part of the solution, make a difference?
Thank you. We are at time, so I want to thank our